Experience. That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings 2021 Week 17. DraftKings picks for the main slate, plus some DraftKings ownership. Switching it up a little bit this week. I usually do like the hour-long show. I'm going to make this one more quick-hitting, update you with what I know in terms of the injury list so far this week and how it's affecting the slate. I'm going to draw my ownerships from runthesims.com. You, too, can join runthesims.com, get the optimizer, player projections, customizable, so you can change around the projections any way you want. Go to runthesims.com. It's $100 for the rest of the year, like till the end of the football season. So Week 17, Week 18, the playoffs, Super Bowl, and then your $100 is done. But still, it's a lot of slates that you can get in. And the DIY single game simulator is like the best showdown tool there is. So you might want to go do that. Runthesims.com right now. Also, the Listeners League link still has a few spots available. Link is down in the description. If you're looking for the injury report and the status update, that is on another side of Mayo Media Network. It's in a different video. I've kind of separated them because, I want to make some DraftKings picks this week. Help some people, well, probably lose money, but, I hope that they would help you win money. We'll see about that, though. Let's talk running backs to kick things off. Oh, yeah, the newsletter has the complete updated cheat sheet for everything, plus the injuries, plus the rankings, plus the DraftKings ownership. Find that down in the description. Substack, Mayo Media, figure it out completely free. You don't even have to sub. You can just click on it and see I update it all the way up until lock on Sundays. So if anything changes, you will find it in there. That's where you need to find it. Running backs, let's do this. David Montgomery is projecting to be one of the higher-owned running backs on the slate. In fact, the four highest-owned are Montgomery, Ronald Jones, Jonathan Taylor, and Sony Michel. Those four guys are going to draw an extreme amount of interest this week in terms of how everyone is going about projecting their lineups. But here's the crazy thing. So I have them all right around like 20%. Some are going to be above, some are going to be on. But when you look at the optimal rates on a lot of these guys, and that's one of the best tools at runthesims.com. So go join. Again, $100 till through the Super Bowl. Ronald Jones doesn't really spike like the other guys do. And I mean, Sony Michel is more closer to Ronald Jones than he is to Montgomery or Taylor. Montgomery ends up in the optimal 22 times, like 22% of the time. Jonathan Taylor ends up in 24% of the time. Now, that's not a shocker. He's $9,000. But his projected ownership is actually lower than that. He actually has a positive optimal rate despite carrying around 20%. It's not a ton, but being in 24, like almost 1/4 of the optimal lineups this week is pretty huge. And the great thing about Run the Sims is going to be that if anything changes, if someone gets like mysteriously added to the COVID list on Sunday morning, the projections are going to update. You can simulate this slate 10,000 times in under 10 seconds. It's why it's the best tool out there, is that you can go do that moment's notice, boom, everything is updated. But Jonathan Taylor is just kind of spiking at the very top. So his optimal rate is super high, obviously, and his leverage rate is going to be super high as well. When it comes to Montgomery, like if you had to play, we saw this last week, Justin Jackson ended up being the chalk cheap guy. He ended up coming through. James Robinson was also a chalk guy. He busted out because it's going to happen sometimes. You tear your Achilles, you're just done. And you're not going to score any fantasy points. You're going to leave yourselves high and dry. I mean, that's a low percentage outcome of what can happen. But that is one of the reasons to fade some of these chalky guys. I would go Taylor above all. Obviously, I'm not an idiot. He's the best play out there in a very easy matchup with a decimated Raiders secondary. Montgomery against the Giants rates out really well, even with Andy Dalton at quarterback. I don't mind that. I could see fading Sony Michel. I could see fading Devin Singletary. I could see fading Ronald Jones, although I can kind of buy Ronald Jones a little bit just because it's the Jets and you can do whatever you want to the Jets. But if we're talking about optimal rate, after those guys, so you have Taylor, Montgomery, Sony Michel, they're the ones who appear in the optimal the most. But then you just have a huge drop-off in terms of projected ownership along with where these guys appear in the optimal. Now, I mentioned Devin Singletary. He is going to draw interest, probably like low double digits against Atlanta. But he appears in the optimal a ton based on the way that he's going to be playing. But now we start getting into guys with super low projected ownership. Someone like Chase Edmonds, because we don't know if, and this is going to kill his ownership, because we don't know if James Conner is going to play or not. He's going to be a game-time decision. Reports are that he's been limited in practice all week. He's kind of the perfect guy to do damage against this Cowboys team, mainly because they don't have a great run defense, and the down the field threats for Arizona have just not been good since DeAndre Hopkins has gone out. Christian Kirk had one good game, but Kirk and Green, we don't even know about Rondell Moore right now. It could be check down city. If Connor's actually going to be out, Edmonds becomes a fantastic play at $5,700, and so few people are going to have him in their original builds because they won't know about James Conner, and they're not going to utilize the late swap. So he is someone that I have my eye on. I'm surprised Austin Eckler and Darrell Williams are both coming in at sub 10% right now. I think that both are excellent plays. Obviously, Eckler is $8,200. Everyone knows he's a good play and he's expensive. But Williams, I thought would draw him and Sony Michel are the same price. They're both $5,800. So you're going to get Sony Michel at around 21% ownership, or Darrell Williams at around 7% ownership. Their projection isn't that dissimilar. I'm looking at it right now. Their median projection, they're 50%. Let's just talk about the 75th percentile projection. That's probably an easier way to do this. Darrell Williams is 20 on the dot, his 75th percentile projection on DraftKings. And Sony Michel is 22. It's a 2-point difference. There's a huge margin of error difference here when one guy is 3 times the ownership at the same price. And yes, Jerick McKinnon has been activated to the 53-man roster. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is officially out for this game. Maybe Derek Gore gets involved. And that's not something that we're going to see with Sony Michel because Akers isn't going to come back. So the projected workload, at least in terms of snap share and control of the backfield, is going to be there in favor of Sony Michel. However, it's even with being this banged up, it's still a bit more difficult to run on the Ravens than it is to run on the Bengals. We know that there is a bit of a commitment to the run from the Chiefs as of late, and Darrell Williams is still going to be massively involved in the passing game here. I think it's worth rolling the dice on a 3 times lesser owned Darrell Williams to achieve the upside that you're looking for in GPP. So those would be the guys that I'd be kicking around. The cheaper play that is probably the best play is Michael Carter. It's not a great matchup, but Tevin Coleman looks like he's going to be out, $5,100. You could go with the Goon, Dare Ogunawale. He is $5,100. Terrible matchup against the Patriots. Or is it? Because if he's going to be used as check down central, no one's going to be more open than the guy standing 3 feet in front of Trevor Lawrence. I don't love it solely because you really need to luck into a touchdown or multiple touchdowns for him to really do it for you at $5,100. If he was $4,000, that would be a different story. Even when I'm looking at the optimals right now, he is, he's 6% in the optimals, 7% owned. He actually has a negative leverage score, so it's probably best to leave him to the wayside. Burkhead, David Johnson might be back. Jared Patterson, I suppose, is the other one, 5% ownership. We don't really know what's going on with him in the backfield right now. Is it going to be all Patterson? Is it going to be some Jonathan Williams? We don't really know. It's a tougher matchup against the Eagles as well. If he could somehow get himself involved in the passing game this week and pile up some receptions, then all of a sudden at $4,800, Jared Patterson could be looking really good. Now, we do know on the ground, if they do get the opportunities, he should be the goal line back for Washington. Should, I'm putting a caveat, because obviously we don't know for sure. But that would be the spot that I would want to go over the Goon. Michael Carter's probably an equivalent play. Yeah, that's probably the spot where I would want to go. If we're looking for optimal rate or optimal leverage rate this week, Jonathan Taylor, despite being as high owned as he is, still rates out the best in terms of optimal rate. Chase Edmonds would be second. Cordero Patterson is there. I just don't like him this week. The computer might like Cordero. Don't love him in this matchup against the Bills. You can run on the Bills if you really commit to doing that. We saw Damian Harris scored 3 touchdowns against him last week. And against good running backs, they have been owned so far this season. But that just isn't going to be the case this week. Donta Foreman against Miami is somewhat interesting at almost no ownership. His leverage score, he's only in the optimal 4% of the time, but he has 2% ownership. That could be a somewhat compelling case. Amir Abdullah against the Saints, that's not really somewhere where I want to go. Rashad Penny could actually be a really good play at $6,100. He's kind of in that middle ground. Alex Collins might not go with this ab problem, but he does seem to be the lead. I don't like having any faith in Rashad Penny, but it's a pretty good price for what it's worth. Wide receivers this week, when we're looking at ownership, we are looking at Antonio Brown. Should decimate the Jets. We don't know if Mike Evans is going to return yet from this hamstring injury. He has been activated from the COVID list. However, Antonio Brown's now a game-time decision with this ankle injury. I think that he's going to play, but he could be a late scratch if they feel like they don't need him. I would just go to Brashad Perriman either way. Not either way. If Evans sits, Perriman is probably the play. He's been activated. He's $4,300. Revenge game against the Jets. Not that that really matters, but if he is playing over Tyler Johnson, which I would expect him to be playing, I could be wrong on that, but at least from what the tea leaves have seen, Brashad Perriman should be the one out there. He's a very adequate fill-in for Mike Evans on the outside when you're playing the Jets, who just have a sieve of a defense. That could be the way to go this week with Brown soaking up so much ownership if he plays. Listen, Antonio Brown's probably going to be a great play. I don't want to dissuade you from playing him, but he appears in the optimal around 19% of the time. The projected ownership has him around like 25, 26%. Like, he's a negative optimal percentage. That doesn't, but he's going to be in it 1/5 of the time. So you really have to, if you're playing the game theory on this in giant GPPs, if it's a 3 max or it's a single entry, yeah, we go with him for sure. But like giant GPPs, Perriman as the pivot might end up being the play. A.J. Brown, Cooper Kupp, Cole Beasley now, Michael Gallup, just because he's only $4,800. These are all guys that project out pretty highly in the ownership. Like Cooper Kupp's going to be owned a ton. Amon-Ra St. Brown, with the 2 other Detroit receivers being down a ton in Khalif Raymond and Josh Reynolds, could be out for this game because of the COVID list. Even with Tim Boyle at quarterback, Amon-Ra St. Brown is someone who's going to garner a ton of interest. So those are kind of the guys that are up there right now. But in terms of who projects out the best in terms of the optimal, I'm going back to Braxton Berrios. He just needs to score a touchdown. He's going to be like 7% owned. He appears in the optimal like 20% of the time. He has the added bonus of potentially returning a kick for a touchdown, although he did that last week, so the chance of him doing it 2 weeks in a row, very low. But hey, sometimes 27 red hits on the roulette wheel and back-to-back-to-back spins. Who knows? But $3,700, when we're digging down at the bottom in terms of salary savings this week, he is probably the best points per dollar guy on the board, because this situation for Braxton Berrios, in terms of what happened last week, is a much more advantageous situation, only because the Jets didn't really have to pass last week. They ran all over Jacksonville. They're not going to do that this week against the Bucs. In fact, they're probably going to be trailing. And without Jamison Crowder around with his calf injury, we saw when pressed last week and forced to pass, it was just laser lock focus on Braxton Berrios. It was like when people talked about what the best Madden game was this year. I think the last one time I bought a Madden game was 06, the one with McNabb on the cover, and that was the first year you had QB vision. So the move would just be like, trigger left all the way down the field, scope that guy, then last second trigger right, wait a beat, and then just bomb it down the right. Just no one's covering that guy anymore. So essentially, Zach Wilson doesn't really like switch off. He just has laser vision for one guy, and that's Braxton Berrios over the middle. You hope that this is a game where he puts in one of those Danny Amendola performances, like 11 catches, 88 yards, and hopefully he scores. But at $3,700, he doesn't need to do a ton to pay that off. Deontay Harris right now, currently on the COVID list, not quite sure where he's going to end up coming in playing or not, but in the projections, if he does play, he's the min. He's $3,000. Don't love it against Carolina, but Stephen Gilmore isn't playing in this game. If someone's going to take a shot down the field, Traquan Smith is out, so it's going to be him or Marquez Callaway. It could be little Jordan Humphrey, but Deontay Harris at the bare min. I'd rather play Berrios at $700 more, but you might not have that luxury. Chenault is down to $3,800. N'Keal Harry is the dead min against Jacksonville. Like, you could do worse than that. Byron Pringle is $4,100, although Hill and Kelsey are both going to be back this week. So there's different spots where you can kind of play it. I actually do. You could even go with like Quez Watkins, Keelan Cole, and Brandon Zylstra are 2 like super cheap guys that you could potentially go to. Zay Jones, based on what's going on with the Raiders secondary. Like, there are guys down at the very bottom. Berrios is my favorite of that bunch, though. So when we look at the optimal leverage rate of a lot of these guys, Berrios is going to be at the highest because the projections love him so much. But like Renfro, Hollywood Brown, if he ends up going, Tyreek Hill is not garnering a ton of ownership after last week. Like, just Mahomes and Hill together. If you think that COVID's going to affect Kelsey, who's going to be super highly owned at tight end, that could be a spot where you kind of go in on him this week. In terms of like raw projections, obviously Kupp is going to be the highest, but he's $9,500. But Hunter Renfrow and Antonio Brown, in terms of pure value, they're probably the best 2 in that situation. At $6,100 and $6,500, we have them as the 3rd and 4th highest projected raw point total receivers of the week. Obviously, they're going to have a ton of. Actually, Renfro's not garnering a ton of ownership against the Colts, weirdly enough. If that's the pivot that you wanted to make, play Renfro instead of Brown, obviously you have to pay up $400 more, but you're going to save yourself like 1/4 to 1/5 of the ownership of people who play Antonio Brown in that spot. The other guys who are coming in, like Jamar Chase, is going to be pretty lowly owned. It seems maybe T. Higgins as well. Like, you just run back the Burrow stack from last week, and hopefully it's a shootout against Kansas City, because those guys, they're up in price, $6,900 and $7,600. It's not cheap to run that stack, but obviously there's plenty of ceiling when it comes along to it. Other than that, like I said, Rashad Perriman is a guy that I like. a little bit. You could fire up some of Cole Beasley and Mike Williams are both going to be back this week. It seems like people are kind of savvy to that for Beasley, not so much Mike Williams, who's $6,000. That could be a decent spot for him as well. In terms of tight ends this week, Travis Kelce, like I mentioned, most likely going to be by far the highest owned. Dallas Goedert's garnering a bunch of buzz as well. Zach Ertz is another one who might end up near the very top of the list in terms of overall ownership. But if we just look at top, like optimal rate for tight ends this week, not one stands out really above another. Goddard is the highest. Ertz is second. Fant is actually fourth or third with both Judy and Patrick out of this game. No word yet on Sutton. I would almost go the other way and go with my guy, Big Albert. Oh, he's $3,000 because Derwin James might just lock down Noah Fant in this spot, and Drew Lock needs to pass to someone. The Chargers defense isn't any good. So Big Albert and for $1,400 less than Noah Fant, I mean, they could be operating as wide receiver 1 and 2 on this team. Not that, that's any great shakes on Denver, but for $3,000, you can do a lot worse in that situation. Other than that, in terms of like the bare min, Steven Anderson, we look up Steven Anderson. Let's see. His base projection this week is 7.1 points. Jared Cook not going to play. Donald Parham out for this game, placed on injured reserve. He's the bare min at $2,500. We've seen tight ends used in this Charger offense enough, and the Broncos defense is pretty decimated. Not quite sure who's going to be in or out based on the COVID list reserve players right now, but Steven Anderson as like the ultimate punt play this week at $2,500. I mean, it's worth a gamble. If you do need the save, if you don't need the savings, don't bother with it. But if you do need to jam in like that, a Chiefs stack, or you need to jam in the Bengals stack with a Chiefs bring back, that's probably the way that you want to go. In terms of quarterback, like really the only one above all right now that I'm seeing, it's going to be Trey Lance and Josh Allen. Those are going to be the two guys that everyone is kind of glomming onto above everyone else. But you can get some, let's see, projected own here. Lance, Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts. But I mean, Prescott is probably going to end up being like 11%. Josh Allen will be like 12%. Trey Lance will be like 16, 17% because he's so cheap. He makes so many lineup. Like if you want to pay up at receiver and running back, Trey Lance is probably going to be the quarterback on that team. It's not going to be $8,000 Josh Allen. And people might leave Diggs out of their Allen stacks as AJ Terrell probably going to be on Diggs. Presumably that means Cole Beasley's going to get a bump. Gabe Davis probably get a bump in that game. Maybe even Dawson Knox as well as a triple stack, or maybe even just a single stack with Beasley with Josh Allen. But Lance, people might just play him by himself for all we know, or play him with Kittle, or play him with Debo. Although the way that they've been utilizing Debo, I'm curious to see. Like I'm interested to see the San Francisco offense this week against a bad Houston defense that they can kind of do whatever they want. But ceiling wise, in terms of our projections, no one really comes close to Josh Allen. Like his ceiling projection is over 40. Now, that's a 95th percentile outcome. It's not likely to happen, but we do know when everything hits for him, it hits big because he can get the double bonus, you get the rushing touchdowns, where that's just very unlikely for a lot of other guys. In terms of optimal rates in your lineups this week, Josh Allen's going to be the highest, and he still outweighs his leverage point right now, but Wentz, now that he's back in, no one's using him against the Raiders because everyone's using Taylor. If you want to go like Wentz and Pittman, I mean, it's a lot of leverage off of Jonathan Taylor, and just hopefully it's a passing touchdown type day. Huntley against the Rams in a potential catch-up situation the entire time. He's going to be like sub 5%. Tua is going to be like 2%. It looks like against the Tennessee Titans. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can play this. Wentz and Huntley. Huntley in particular, I find particularly intriguing. Is sort of, he's $5,600. He is in that middle range between like the regular guys that you would play and Trey Lance, who's down at the bottom. And when we take a look at the projected ownership right now at quarterback, let's see here. Just want to make sure that I'm not missing anyone at quarterback. Who kind of falls in this? I mean, Brady against the Jets might be like 6%. You just want to go nuts. Brown, Brady, Perriman if Evans doesn't play, Evans if he does play, or play Gronk against the Jets because he eats up the Jets. Like, usually when you can get a sub like 5%, 6% Brady, that's usually the way that you want to go when he's playing like the worst defense in the league. Herbert's down at like 4%, Burrow's down at like 3%, so that Cincinnati stack is not going to be very popular this week. Mahomes, I mean, he's up there in terms of ownership, but with Lance, Allen, and Dak and Hurts kind of taken away from everything, he's going to come in between like 5 and 8% too, so that can just simply, you could even go Pringle if you wanted to, but if let's just say you want to play Mahomes and Hill, it's probably a week to do it because they're not as popular as they normally are, and the matchup is still just as good in a game which projects to be the highest in terms of points this week. Like, it's an over 50 projected point total. It's not a bad situation to get into. And then at defense, pick your poison, to be perfectly honest with you. Just who is the cheap defense that we can play this week that will turn out well. If you can afford the Patriots defense against Jacksonville, I would recommend that. But you probably don't want to pay, what are they this week, like $90,000? Because that would be an accurate pricing, $3,900. The Bucs and the Patriots are very clearly the two best plays of the week. They just have to be way too much money. Do you really want to spend up on defense? No, is probably the answer to that question. So if we go down to the bottom, let's see, Jets against the Bucs. Now, Lions, $2,400 against Seattle. That one I could see. That one I could get behind. Ravens against the Rams, $2,500. Not that I expect, like, Stafford's just a turnover machine. And Baltimore can still bring pressure. Jimmy Smith is going to be back. Their defense is not as decimated as they once were. They're at home. So $2,500, it's not a lock by any means, but it is a pretty good situation to be in. The Dolphins against Tennessee is a pretty intriguing one too. Terrible offensive line for the Titans. The blitz rate is going to be out of this world for the Dolphins. They might give up points, but they should generate a lot of turnovers as well. So the Colts, and probably the two safer ones that you can go with, Colts at $2,900, Dolphins at $2,800. They're kind of that middle ground, not too expensive, not too hot, not too cold, right in the middle, just right in that price range if you don't need to punt. If you do need to punt, then yeah, I could see going down to the Lions, going down to the Ravens. You can get to the Chargers or Cowboys at $3,100 and $3,200 as well. If you have a little bit of extra salary cap around, you could probably test that out as well. I like both those defenses as well this week. What are the Giants? The Giants are $2,800 against Andy Dalton. I mean, I don't love it, but against Andy Dalton is a pretty good sell job, an SJ, if need be. So if you need to just randomly pick a defense, that could be one you go to. That game reeks of running, though, which is not fantastic news on both sides. I think it was their game last week. I think it was the Eagles and Giants game last week. That was just over 45 minutes before every other game on the early slate. Bears, Giants reeks of that game this week. It's like, oh yeah, we're entering the fourth quarter. Chiefs and Bengals. Like, oh, that other game is over already. It was 9-7. Great. And like no one did anything in the game. They ran the ball 700 times. That's just the read that I get from that game. Anyway, that will do it for the quick DraftKings report. I hope you like this show because I like talking through it in this way where I can talk about it more later in the week. I can look at the projections. I can look at the ownership projections because when I do it on a Wednesday night, I don't quite have a lot of that information. Obviously, stuff can get blown up by an injury report here and there with a timely guy like if Patrick Mahomes all of a sudden isn't playing on Sunday. Well, that's not great news. Now, is it? That's going to affect everything. That's why I use runthesims.com to make sure that I can simulate the slate up to 10,000 times with my own projections whenever I want to. And you can do that too. $100 rest of the football season. So go check that out. Play in the Listeners League as well. Link is in the description. It's almost full. Sub to the newsletter where I'll have the updated injury reports, and you can find a lot of the information I just talked about in there as well if you need to reference anything going forward. I'm Pat Mayo. Smash the like on the way out. I'll see you next time.
Mayo Experience! Experience!